Here's another lesson from Marcus Aurelius. He talks about the need for self-discipline. He says, training the mind to remain steady in adversity fosters the resilience needed in order to act courageously. So it's called self-discipline. What do we talk about on Tuesday? That Paul wrote to Timothy. We have not been given a spirit of timidity, but one of discipline and power. So self-discipline happens when we fix our eyes upon Jesus, right? And the more we focus on Jesus, the more disciplined that we can become, which allows us then to do what? Act and think courageously. Welcome to the Salty Pastor Podcast. It's an exciting time in our little ecosystem, our little neck of the woods, so to speak, as we are growing. And we have now ordered a chunk of books, How to Read and Understand the Bible, and we're going to be sending those out to all of those who donate and support the Salty Pastor ecosystem, our ministry here. And so if you're a regular donor, you will be receiving one of those books as soon as they arrive here at the studio. So we're very excited about that. Also, something that I'm really encouraged about, really excited about, is that the National Fathering Institute, it is an organization. It's been around since the 90s, early 90s, and it was started by a man by the name of Ken Canfield, a very prominent author on fathering. And he started this organization for the sole purpose of counteracting the epidemic of fatherlessness in America. He's done some phenomenal work over the years. He's written a lot of really great books. Well, his organization, the National Fathering Institute, puts out a devotion or an email I don't know if they do it once a week or every other week. I can't recall, but they contacted me and asked me if I would write an article for them, and I did. And it's called Happy Dads Are the Best Dads. And it is just coming in right before Father's Day. Very excited about it. They sent it out this week, and so it's going to be emailed to over 20,000 different people, and it's also on their highly trafficked website. So if you want to go to NFI or the National Fathering Institute, you can look it up there, and you will see from the Salty Pastor an article about happy dads are the best dads. And the reason why I say in this article that happy dads are the best dads is because happy people do four things. And of course, if you've been listening to the Salty Pastor Podcast, you know what they are. And that is happy people with the greatest level of happiness in their life, pursue their faith. They have a deep spiritual component, and that is really critical to being a great dad. So if you pursue your faith, you're happier. Guess what? You're going to be a great dad. Also, family. They put a high priority on family. Number 3, friendship is critical. They have high quality friends. And then they pursue meaningful work. And so when you pursue happiness as a father, you're also pursuing how to be a really great father for your kids and grandkids. So look for that. Check it out. Very, very excited about it. We are currently in a series about a championship mindset. And we're going to be in this series for 9 months to 12 months because I really believe that down deep in our core, one of the biggest issues we have is just wrong thinking. There was an old motivational speaker, and he used to say, we got a lot of stinking thinking going on here right now. And that's so true. And that is our brains are so convoluted, twisted around because of the constant consumption of media and influences and divergent ideas that it's difficult to just wade through it all. You add on top of that the pressures of having both parents in a household having to work, or a single parent having to provide, and because things are just so much more expensive now and our economy requires that. It's just really quite amazing to me how all the pressures of living, all the pressures of tragedy, suffering, failed expectations, and then you add to it the constant bombardment of all these messages and social media and the news and just everything going on. No wonder our brains are scrambled eggs. It's no wonder our brains are scrambled eggs. And because of that, our thinking is got a whole lot of stinking in it. And that is why it is so difficult to think like a champion. Now, what does that mean? Well, we explored this over and over again. We're going to keep doing it. And I want to say it so many times so that you really let it soak in. And that is, mature people who are clear thinkers set realistic expectations. And so the most important question you can ask is, what does God intend for my faith to produce in me? By having faith, growing faith, pursuing faith, what should it produce in me? And you need to clarify what your expectations about your faith really are. And that's where you kind of start to, reveal to yourself whether your expectations of your faith are biblical in their orientation, in other words, clear thinking, or are they material, worldly expectations, which gives you confused and convoluted thinking. Do you see the connection there? If you expect faith to simply make life better in the material world, is that really a strong, powerful, overcoming faith? Or is that a faith that produces weakness, right? Jesus said it this way: are you building your house upon the sand, or are you building it on a firm foundation? Well, when you ask the question, what do I expect my faith to produce in me? You're asking the question, am I building on sand, or am I building on a solid rock foundation? The New Testament clearly teaches your faith is intended to produce in you a victorious, overcoming mindset. That's what it's supposed to do. And the only way it can do that is if it's built upon a rock-solid foundation. The second thing that we really dug into, and I really believe that every person has to go through this, and you really have to experience it for yourself, and that is how to deal with guilt effectively. Guilt motivates us. Guilt influences us in ways we never imagined. It's so much deeper. And reason why is because it kind of goes back into your childhood and the family we were raised in. And so much of the way we deal with guilt, the tools that we use, are subconsciously ingrained in our brain. And so until you start to evaluate that, think about it, and start to work through how to correct the bad ways you deal with emotional guilt, or the way emotional guilt affects you, you can never think like a champion. So that's why courage is such a big deal, because courage is the building block on which all the championship mindset is developed. It's the very first stepping stone. If you're building a house, before you can even put down a slab or put down a stem wall on which to build the house, you got to put down a thing called a footing. And so that's the big thing at the bottom, and then you put your stem walls on it, and so it looks like an upside down T, capital letter T. And so it's so important to understand you got to start with courage if you want a really great footing to carry the load of your life. Courage is, what I like to think is, it's the adrenaline pump that overcomes the numbing effects of guilt, shame, and sin and death in your life. It is like a shot of adrenaline that just fires you up and clarifies everything and gets you moving. Because I'll tell you what, guilt, shame, sin, death, all these things in your life, guess what? They numb you. They just numb you to life. And when you start suffering, or you're facing a really challenging time, you're going to experience numbness. And that's when you don't need a foggy conscience, you need a clear conscience. And so courage is critical to fire you up. So let's dig into this a little bit more today, especially if you're listening to this on a Sunday morning and doing it during your spiritual time of worship on a Sunday for the Lord. And that is, let's look at some more lessons about it. And one of the things I want to do is I want to go back in history, and I just want to show you that the biblical concept of what courage is and how to develop in your life has pretty much influenced or manifested in every major philosophy since Jesus walked the earth. That's right. Probably the greatest example of this that we have today is in the life of Marcus Aurelius. He was a Roman emperor, and he is known as like the father of Stoicism. And it's kind of having a resurgence in America today, particularly among young males. And this notion of Stoicism, and he deals with a lot. Courage is a really, really big thing. It's a very core component of Stoicism. And he wrote this thing. He was a Roman emperor, I think, in 180 to 200 and something AD. So this is about 180 years after Christ was born and lived. And so you're talking a good 150 years after the New Testament was written and Christianity had been really launched, so to speak. And what's really interesting is how biblical teaching on courage is critical to all of the manifestations and influence in the Roman Empire and all other philosophers since then. And you know how I always say that the way you think is just as important as what you're thinking, right? And it makes all the difference. And what you really see, particularly in the teachings of Marcus Aurelius, is a philosophy of courage mindset. And this philosophy of mindset that he talks about is heavily influenced by Christianity. Let me connect the dots for you, okay? In his book that he wrote, is called Meditations. He believed you needed to pursue various practices in everyday life, and you also needed to establish certain mindsets that foster courage. He says courage is the key. It's one of the top virtues in Stoicism. And I want to go through some of these things that he talks about in his book, The Meditations, and I want you to see like a sense of familiarity as to where they may have come from, right? Because Marcus Aurelius just didn't wake up one day and go, oh, I got this new thought. Nobody's ever thought of this before. I'm going to write it down in a book, and it's going to become Stoicism. It doesn't work that way. Some of these people that write, some of these people that espouse these philosophies are learning and growing in them from other people who espouse them, and those people pick them up from somewhere. And my question has always been, well, where did they get them? Where did these ideas actually originate from? For instance, one of the biggest things that Marcus Aurelius focuses on is using your rational mind, right? He goes, you need to develop a pattern of rational thinking. And he says that courage is developed by using reason to assess situations accurately, recognizing that fear often stems from misjudgment about external events. Isn't that interesting, right? He says you need to develop a process, a rational process, to assess situations accurately. Now, why do you want to do that? He says because you have to understand that fear, which is the opposite of courage, it originates from a misjudgment, a misunderstanding about the external event in which you are wrapped up. And what's really interesting is we do this all the time, and that is when something happens. You know, let's say you have a boss and you are in a situation and your boss says, hey, I know that we said we're going to give you a raise when you hit these numbers, but those numbers have gone up 15%, so you're not going to get a raise until you hit the new numbers. And so what we tend to do is we tend to look at that and go, well, why did they do this? Why are they doing that? And then we look for motive, and we think, well, they're doing that because of this, and they're doing that because they don't like me, or they're doing that because of this, or they're doing that because of that. And what Marcus Aurelius would say is that first and foremost, you can't know why they're doing what they're doing. So don't misjudge the external events, right? Another perfect example is you're driving down the street and some guy's weaving through traffic and you're going, oh, there's another one of those morons messing everything up. That guy needs to slow down. And what's he doing? And you get all bent out of shape over that, right? And he's saying, well, do you actually know and can judge the situation accurately, right? It goes on and on. When your spouse, says something How often do you attribute motive or intent to something they say and it's not accurate? You see, over and over again, Marcus Aurelius says that fear, which is the opposite of courage, comes from misjudging external events, regardless of what they are. He says, so develop a rational process to try to assess situations accurately. And oftentimes, in my opinion, that's just simply saying, well, we actually don't know that. Another thing you can say is, well, what difference does it make knowing that? What difference does it make knowing why the company changed the benchmark before you get a raise? Who knows why? And does it make any difference? The only thing that you really have any control over is, am I capable of reaching the new benchmark? And if so, when? Right? I'm going to do that. Now, if you go back and say, okay, I've been reaching these benchmarks, and then every time I do, they go, and you have a history of, 5, 7, 8 times they've done this, and they don't do it to anybody else, and everybody else is getting a raise at a lower benchmark, well, then you have a case. But that's rare. And what we tend to do is get so bent out of shape, which then guilt and shame and all of these false narratives that we play in our head come back to influence us, right? And that robs you of joy. It robs you of courage. It robs you of all the great virtues of a mature and growing faith. It robs you of the capacity to overcome and be victorious. And that's what's so important. So Marcus Aurelius comes up with this, and you're thinking, wow, that's really profound. That's really amazing. But I would ask you, where did he get the idea in the first place? He heard it from somebody or from somebody else, and somebody else thought. And isn't it Paul in the Romans who said, be transformed by the renewal of your mind? He says it's in our mind that a lot of this courage development is established because our minds are being renewed to think more rationally and clearly. When you think clearly, guess what happens? Your conscience clears up. And you know that your conscience is like the compass of courage. And the clearer your conscience is, the easier it is to act courageously. Okay, let's look at another thing. In Meditations, he often talks about this notion of controlling your perceptions, which I think we could interpret today meaning control your feelings about the events that are happening around you. He says it this way. He says, by reframing challenges as opportunities, it allows you to exercise virtue. Individuals then can cultivate courage by focusing on their internal feelings, emotional life responses, rather than the external circumstances. So if something happens, instead of saying, well, how do I feel about what happened? You can say, I want to focus on my internal response to what has happened. This is so critically important in our world today in dealing with people who want to manipulate you emotionally. I was listening to a podcast, and this person was talking about the explosion of narcissistic behavior in America today. That so many people are more selfish-driven, have a more narcissistic orientation than ever before. And what's really interesting is that one of the reasons why I think that has happened is because our culture has cultivated that way of thinking in the lives of people. How has it done that? By getting people to focus on how they feel about somebody else's behavior as opposed to, well, their actions don't control my feelings or emotions. I don't need to have an opinion of how I feel about what they did. All I need to ask myself is, what am I choosing to do? Because I am in control of how I feel. I am in control of my behavior. I am the boss of my life, right? I can make choices, and my choices determine my future. And most importantly, when you get that mindset shift in your life, that's when you can start living more courageously. I want to go back to the conscience issue, is that when you spend all your time asking yourself how you feel about other people's behavior and then asking yourself why they're doing what they're doing, you just get more confused. Your conscience doesn't get clear, it gets foggy. And so it's really important to understand what he talks about, the control of your perceptions, and that is change how I perceive why people are doing what they are doing. And so what's so interesting is, where did this idea come from? Well, the scriptures teach that we are to focus not that which is seen, but that which is unseen. You know, it says, fix your eyes on something else. Jesus, the author and perfecter of your faith. He says, let's not focus on this momentary light affliction. He said, this opportunity that is a challenge is actually giving us a situation or circumstance to exercise our faith and our virtue in ways we never imagined. You see, isn't it fascinating how you can see that what he's talking about was written about over a century before he wrote it down? The other thing he talks about, and this is real easy dot to connect, is he talks about you have to practice virtue if you want to develop a courageous mindset. In his book, The Meditations, he says, the more you act in accordance with justice, wisdom, and temperance, the stronger your courage will become. And the reason why is because it's aligning you with a higher purpose. Now, where in the world did that come from? You can't go a chapter and a half, any letter of the New Testament, and not get that message. Paul, Peter, John, Luke, they all talk about how important it is let us attain to the standard which we have achieved. Let us forsake immorality. Let's take off the old and put on the new. It's just a constant teaching of first century Christianity. And that is that the more I get rid of the old and the more I align with the new and who Christ has created me, guess what? The stronger my courage becomes. Isn't that a wonderful thing? Here's another lesson from Marcus Aurelius. He talks about the need for self-discipline. He says, training the mind to remain steady in adversity fosters the resilience needed in order to act courageously. So it's called self-discipline. What do we talk about on Tuesday? That Paul wrote to Timothy. We have not been given a spirit of timidity, but one of discipline and power. So self-discipline happens when we fix our eyes upon Jesus, right? And the more we focus on Jesus, the more disciplined that we can become, which allows us then to do what? Act and think courageously, which reinforces this notion of overcoming and victory in our life. It's courage that allows you to produce and experience the fruit of spirits in your life. Love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, mercy. And Paul says, against these things there is no law. So everybody wants this. But the reason we don't experience it is because we're not thinking courageously. I'm not saying acting, I'm just saying thinking courageously. Here's something that I find really fascinating is that Marcus Aurelius was really intent on talking about morality. The early Romans talked about morality quite a bit, actually. But the source of his morality was fascinating because this is what he said in meditation. He goes, you need to contemplate your death all the time. And they really believed in something called fate. And that is, well, when they punch your ticket, you're done. And you have no influence over that. It's up to fate, right? So healthy living, they didn't live healthy for the sole purpose of living longer because they felt that fate had already determined when you're going to die and nothing you can do about that. They would live healthy and do the things they did because of the material benefit at the time. And so what's interesting is he says that if you contemplate your death regularly, it diminishes your fear and allows you to live and act courageously in the present moment. Isn't that fascinating to think back over almost 150 years prior to this? Jesus is talking about how I came to free you from sin and death. In his letter to the Corinthians, the first one, chapter 15, Paul says something about death. And he says, the resurrection of Jesus Christ is the linchpin, the core truth on which all of Christianity exists. If you take the resurrection of Jesus away, he says it's all a house of cards. You've believed something in vain. It has no value. And he says the reason why the resurrection of Jesus is so important in Christianity is because he later on he says, because death is swallowed up in victory. That's the victory mindset. He says, even death cannot conquer you. Even death no longer is lost. He goes, oh, death, where is your sting, like the sting of a bee? Where is your victory, right? And so he says, you have no victory. And he says, because the sting of death is fear. Do you see how all this is so connected? And that's why it's so fascinating that Marcus Aurelius, 100 and some odd years later, is writing in this in Meditations about how to overcome fear and how to get used to things you can't control, like death. It's just so, this stuff, I know I'm being a little nerdy about this stuff, but it just blows my mind how much Christianity has influenced thinking, and so many people have no idea. I'll just throw out one more so that you don't get tired of me. And that is, you have to act consistently every time you face a challenge. You can't be all over the map, so to speak. You have to react the same way and have a consistency every time you're going through a setback, a challenge, a failure, something that can, affect you negatively. In his book, he writes, maintaining a steady mindset through life's challenges will build courage by reinforcing what he calls mental fortitude. And what's he talking about that? Well, he's talking about mental fortitude is perseverance. It's no matter what, I win. You see this theme cropping up all the time. For instance, Paul talks about resisting temptation. And he says there's no temptation that you're facing that isn't common to everybody. So quit making such a big deal out of it, And he talks about, yes, we're suffering, but he said, Peter says the saints of old suffered, right? And their faith was reckoned as shining examples of how we should live. The writer of Hebrews says, we have a great cloud of witnesses around us. And so the whole notion of mental fortitude and strength is a powerful biblical principle that is articulated over and over and over and over again, beginning with Jesus, going through Luke and the book of Acts, and then all the authors of the letters that make up the rest of the New Testament. So that's what's so important is I want you to be amazed like I am. I want you to share that with me, my amazement at how much of what Marcus Aurelius wrote about in his book, Meditations, it predates him by 120 years, maybe 150 years of what was written in the New Testament. And we know that the upper echelon of Roman thought was being penetrated by Paul when you read the book of Acts, and he went between the proconsul and he was debating these things. He went to the philosophers in Athens and he debated these things. And what did he do? He seeded all of these ideas. And so there was really a powerful, influence of Christian thought early on in Rome. And so this just amazes me, and once again shows you how Jesus is probably the most influential, thought-provoking figure in human history. And more than that, for those of us who believe and follow him, he is the Lord of Lords and the King of Kings. And it's just absolutely wonderful. So you know what I would like you to do this week is that going into this weekend, I want you to focus on the importance of developing a courageous mindset. Last Monday, we celebrated Memorial Day. And Memorial Day is a day where we take out some time and we'll celebrate. We barbecue, we get together, we have some parties. But those things are secondary to the most important thing of all, and that is freedom isn't free. And we look back in the history of the wars that were fought, like World War I, World War II. These were massive wars, and liberty and freedom were on the line. And the American soldier stepped up. The American worker stepped up. And it was our capacity to produce and manufacture things and our capacity to fight on the front lines and learn and adapt is what let us win the day on two major fronts, one in the Pacific and one in the European theater. You got to think about how massive those wars really were. And on Memorial Day, we celebrate the courage that it took to win those battles. Where did that courage come from? Did people act courageously because they were just mad that the Japanese attacked us on Pearl Harbor? No, they may have been mad, but that's not where courage came from. Their courage came because of what they believed, right? They believed, and that belief at its core drove them to be disciplined. It drove them to have mental fortitude. It drove them to have perseverance. It drove them to never give up even after they suffered a defeat. It just pushed and pushed and pushed. And that's why I'm always saying, what you believe is one of the most important things about you. So please think about what you really, truly, authentically believe in the depth of your soul. And get that figured out, because that's where courage comes from, is when you get that figured out. And that's what I want for you, is I want your faith to produce in you a victorious, overcoming mindset, because that's how Jesus intends for you to live. Now, I would love for you to accept this challenge and think about how you can develop a deeper, courageous mindset by clarifying what you actually truly believe in your soul. Really, write it down, think about it, ask yourself over and over again, do I really believe what I say I believe? Now, would you share this podcast with some friends? I'd love for you to do that. I just think it's so beneficial. We're seeing this ecosystem grow. If you'd like to receive one of those books, all you have to do is go to our website, click on that donate button, and become a regular donor for The Salty Pastor. Also, while you're there, sign up for the Monday morning inspirational email. It goes out every Monday, and it's designed to help you get fired up for the week. And also go to our YouTube channel, The Salty Pastor, and click on like and subscribe and watch our subscription grow. And also go over to the National Fathering Institute and see if you can find my article there. I think you'll enjoy it. Until then, Salty Pastor signing off.